To the US, and Title 42, the Trump policy that allows authorities to expel illegal immigrants, expires tomorrow. We're already seeing the US lose control of its southern border, with well over 2 million coming in illegally every year under Joe Biden. And right now, there are incredible scenes at the southern border, with thousands streaming in and local governments and federal authorities bracing for an even bigger influx of migrants attempting to cross the border illegally. Joining me from LA is filmmaker Ami Horowitz. Ami, these are incredible scenes. They're expected to get worse. What happened to the media's obsession with the border that we saw under Trump? I'm not hearing much at all about kids in cages, though we know there are plenty of kids in cages thanks to the record numbers crossing illegally.
Yeah, there sure are. And you don't see AOC dressed in white hovering over the kids like a bartending specter either, do you? No, they don't want to call attention to the fact that under Biden, there are still, in fact, kids in cages. And no, it's incredible. Yeah, like you said, the number, 2 million people have crossed over. The estimates by the Biden administration themselves is after Title 42, over 14,000 people additionally will be crossing every single day, Rita. And I'm no mathematician, but incredible. I know if you carry the one, and it's about almost 7 million people who will be crossing into the border if this is left unchecked.
That's the size of a major city. We're talking about millions. This is going to have significant demographic change. These are just record numbers that are coming in, and it seems like the administration is just accepting that this is happening.
Well, so it's interesting that they continue to double down on what will end up being one of the greatest political blunders in U.S. political history. It was the bet that if we do, in their words, the continuation of the browning of America, right? Those are their words, that will do is enshrine the Democratic majority forever. But what we're actually seeing is that over the course of time, the Hispanic population, the Latin American population has been moving more decisively to Republicans, not to Democrats. But I think it's also interesting that if you saw the comments by Mayor Adams when he said, hey, you're sending everybody to these blue cities, which have to be run by black mayors. That's racist. That's literally his comment. Or Lori Lightfoot, even better. She called it inhumane to send them to her city, Chicago. Her city. Now, by the way, it may be inhumane because the way she runs that city, the amount of people who are killed in the streets every day, she might be right about that. But that's the level of hypocrisy and insanity that we're dealing with on this, Rita.
Well, absolutely. And those blue cities happen to be sanctuary cities. So they promote themselves as sanctuary cities, but when you actually send them these illegal immigrants, they scream and carry on. And you look at what those border towns have to deal with day in and day out. The death of a homeless man on a New York subway a few days ago has caused protests by BLM and other leftist agitators. Jordan Neely was placed in a chokehold by a US Marine veteran after he got on the train and started abusing and threatening passengers. And already there's been protests demanding that Daniel Penny, the 24-year-old Marine veteran, be charged with murder. BLM and number of race-baiting politicians have jumped on this issue with gusto because the Marine veteran is white and Neely was black. Here we see some mainly non-black BLM protesters stopping black workers from using the subway.
Get out of her face! Get out of her face! You can get out of the train or something! Get out of her face! Get out of her face!
So get another train. Take another train.
And here we see a black police officer being berated by protesters, even though the police had absolutely nothing to do with this death. Ami, Jordan Neely's death should have never happened. He should have been probably locked up. He had been arrested 42 times, including for punching a 67-year-old woman in the face. But this case has sparked protests and all sorts of calls from politicians.
Yeah, what this really is. It is a tragedy. It's a failure of left-wing urban policy. It's a failure of our mental health policies. It really is a shame and a tragedy that it came to that. But I think that we have to understand a number of things. First of all, yeah, you mentioned the fact that he was arrested 42 times. You mentioned the fact that he punched a 67-year-old woman. None of that stuff isn't really how they're portraying the narrative, right? The narrative that CNN and the rest of them are portraying is one of a man who was a Michael Jackson impersonator who was distraught on the death of his mother. All true, by the way. But leaving out the time and time again that he was hurting people, threatening people, the time he spent in and out of jail and arrest, they leave that because it goes against their narrative. By the way, the same reason, the left-wing protesters, they don't care about black people like you saw in that video. They care about their narrative. Narrative uber alles. And one has to understand, if you're not living in New York City, what it's like now and what it was like just 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you were never accosted on the subway. The subways were clean. Today, I mean, saying it's a hellscape is probably overstating it, but it is very uncomfortable to ride the subway. It is dirty. People are smoking. People are accosting you, begging for money. I have been threatened a number of times in the subway. I've seen it over and over again. And to have somebody, and look, you're just not happy using it. Who's that affect the most, Rita? It affects people in the lower classes because they have no choice but to take the subway. Those are the lives you are ruining by allowing the Jordan Neelys to accost and take over the subway platform and trains because you're making it difficult for people to get to work. That is a significant problem.
Absolutely. Ami Horowitz, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Always a pleasure, Rita.